kuamka asubuhi, utoke kwako nyumbani, uingie katika msitu, ukae siku 7, utoke nje useme wewe sasa ndio kiongozi wetu. Kama hivyo ndivyo viongozi wanachaguliwa, sisi wote tutaingia msituni, tukae siku 7, tutoke nje tuseme hata mimi ni kiongozi.
Lazima tushikane pamoja ndio tuendelee kuwa kwa serikali. Sisi hatutaenda opposition. Lakini tukiendelea kugawanywa, hiyo ndio direction tunaenda. Kwa hivyo vijana wetu lazima tuwaongeleshe waelewe.
Mimi nimesema nimechoka na siasa ya umbwa na paka. Even dog is important when you are hunting. It should also be important when you are eating. Tuachana mambo ya tamaa. Tuwasupport reki bake miaka 10. Na tuwe na nkolo njega sana. Sidio? We have supported Euro for 10. Let us not hear of another candidate ambaye ametoka huko.
Watu ambao walishindwa kura, akina Kabogo, sijui Waweru, Waiguru, nimeona Mwangi wa Iria, wale wako. My friends, we are not children from a lesser God. We have stood with you people for a very long time. If you find now Muturi does not fit, si kumutusi na kumudharau na nini, sababu natudharau sisi zote. Hii haitaendelea tena. Wacha kama ni kupasuka, ipasuke.
Wow, so those are sights and sounds from Mount Kenya. For the first time we're hearing Mount Kenya West and East. Francis, I'll start with you here. This is unfamiliar territory for that huge vote block that we see every election year. That right now there's a split. The trigger seems to have been the coronation, as we've called it in the media, of Justin Muturi, the National Assembly Speaker, as a spokesperson in that region. And it's interesting hearing Anne Waiguru, for example, the governor of Kirinyaga, saying, huwezi kuamka tu uende msitu alafu kuje. Is that what really happened?
Well, I don't think so. By the time you saw Justin Muturi head to Murang'a for that function, he didn't just wake up and went to that function. There were obviously many preparations that went on behind the scenes, and there are obviously other forces behind him. When you look at the function and how grand it looked, it can give you an idea or two about what is happening.
And there were a lot of policemen just in case.
Yeah, just in case. It was a big function, and how grand it was tells you something. But be it as it may, that function by and itself has triggered a new narrative in the Mount Kenya region. Even leaders who are not necessarily saying many things about succession and what will happen next year, it kind of woke them up. And it is part of the survival politics, that's how I look at it. Basically, everybody wants to know where they will be next year. Some of the politicians from the region have served, let's say, 2 terms as governor. So they would want to know, okay, so where are we heading to? Some lost in the last election, and they would want a scenario where they have an avenue to return to the political fold and in political leadership. So it's a mix of many factors. But ultimately, the scenario that the Mount Kenya region finds itself in is totally unfamiliar. Totally unfamiliar in the sense that, unlike in 1992, 1997, 2002, 2007, 2013, 2017, when the region had a clear frontrunner for the presidential race, the scenario looks slightly different now, because if you ask somebody from the Mount Kenya region, so do you have a presidential candidate from this region for next year? Probably the answer would be no, unless somebody comes up in the remainder of the period. And then secondly, President Uhuru Kenyatta is a slight departure from retired President Mwai Kibaki. I would think he would want to play a bigger role in his succession than President Mwai Kibaki did, at least publicly. And thirdly, the question of Mount Kenya East and Mount Kenya West is something that has been there, though in a subtle manner. But now it is being played out openly. Why? Because the Speaker of the National Assembly comes from Embu County. That is considered the Mount Kenya East. And so when the Mount Kenya East says we see a scenario where we have an opportunity to rise to at least the top level or somewhere there, gives you an idea of the kind of politics that we see. But ultimately, it's a question of the game of numbers in the Mount Kenya region. Whether these numbers will go to one person or these numbers will split is the ultimate question. But in 1992, Mwai Kibaki got a portion, Kenneth Matiba got a portion, and other presidential candidates have come from the region in previous elections. But ultimately, there has always been that one dominant figure in the presidential contest. Do we have such a scenario in the next election? Looks unlikely. And so the region has to work around a scenario where it will still be at the table, because the numbers therein are still significant in such a way that they will influence how the voting patterns go. If you're talking about a possibility of, let's say, 22, 23 million registered voters, even assume 20 million people turn up to vote, you're talking about a presidential candidate in the next election who must get at least 10 million votes. Getting 10 million votes, you have to work very, very hard for them. And you have to look across the country where those 10 million votes will come from. So if the Mount Kenya region is one of the mainstays politically in terms of the numbers, it's a region where everybody would want to be at. So no wonder they scramble for the mountain as you see it today.
Joe, picking up from where Gashuri left off, and he was talking about how Central finds itself in a position it's not been in. Because remember, the politics in that region has always been kupatia kura mtu wa nyumbani. Hata kama itagawanywa amongst whoever the main candidates are. He talked about 1992 when we had Kenneth Matiba and Mwai Kibaki. 1997 we had the two of them again. In 2002 we had Mwai Kibaki. I think they had a very good election for them, because the main two opponents were from the region, Mwai Kibaki and Uhuru Kenyatta. It was looking at a coin, which has kama ni heads, ni sawa, kama ni tails, ni sawa, because they are the two main candidates who were from that side. Come 2007, they had Mwai Kibaki. And Linus mentioned this when we were talking previously before we took a break about how Uhuru Kenyatta was the leader of opposition back then. KANU actually led the opposition to go and support the government to help Mwai Kibaki win in that election. And then 2013, it was easy, I think, for Uhuru Kenyatta to come out as the kingpin of the region at that time. 2017, same thing, he was the one. But now we talk about how they find themselves in a situation where they've not been before. Because now it's almost open market. Anyone who wants to anajitokeza ajaribu bahati yake kwa field. But then that tells you a bit about the politics in Kenya, where we rally behind kingpins. We've mentioned all those from Mount Kenya, but then look at somewhere like in the western part of the country. We had Moses Mudavadi, we had Masinde Muliro, we had Mudi Awori at some point, we had Michael Kijana Wamalwa as a leader in that region. And even in Central, other than Kibaki and Kenneth Matiba, we have Jeremiah Nyaga, who are also leaders in that part of the country. Ambao ni kingpin, watu ambao they bring people together. Go to Nyanza. The family of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga has taken over the award of viongozi katika eneo hilo. But we have leaders like Dalmas Otieno, you can remember him. Those are leaders who wanasemekana kama kingpins wa maeneo hayo. And that's the politics that we have in Kenya. And that's how it's been. That's why it's very important for Mlima Kenya for this. And finally, Joe, in my opinion, I think this is too early to start getting worried about where the direction will be for Mount Kenya. Ni kama at this point it's like the person who's speaking kwa match anataja reserve players bado wajaanza kusema wale ambao wataingia kwa field kwenda kucheza game. So I think it's a bit too early. Let's see how things go in the next 6 months. I'm sure things will be different. Kufikia hapo April, May, June.
Nina, what this reminds me of when William Olentimama once said tutakanyagana hapo ndani mpaka wengine waende pembeni.
Yes. Yes, and that pembeni, talking of pembeni, Joe, I think there's something sad about how we are progressively moving away from ideological ways of political mobilization what is becoming entrenched now completely, in a way that even independence era leaders did not, is ethnicity. There's something very primitive about how we organize. And it starts actually with what we are seeing with Mount Kenya. Mount Kenya is actually having a complete row about East and West.
Independent of the rest of the country.
Independent of the rest of the country. And it looks like we don't learn as a country. We've done so many of these experiments, especially when it comes to ethnicity, that by now we should realize there's actually no ethnic formula to running a modern state. And this realization ought to start even from the regions that talk of numbers. Because look at what is happening in Mount Kenya. And listen to the voices of those leaders that are talking there. Do they still remember that this is a country of 42 plus communities? Do they still remember that probably a Boni, a Gabra, and James,
who are their kingpins?
Yeah. Yes, can actually, and Ogiek, can they also aspire to lead the country based on the ideas they present, based on the quality of their character, as opposed to the numbers that back them in terms of ethnicity? I think we are not in a good space. We are not in a good space. We've never been here, actually. For the last, can we give it, since actually 2002 coming this way, since the removal of KANU from power, we've not had structured politics. We don't have ideology. And you saw earlier when Kalonzo and Ngilu speak and Raila talks, the president talks, none of them is talking ideology. None of them says the ideas of this party, we share these ideas. We share these values as leaders from different regions. They are telling you we have this basket of ethnic numbers that we will unleash on electoral day. We should be ashamed with how we are degenerating. And I don't know how sustainable this is, because even when this debate on BBI was coming up the other day, BBI speaks of building bridges. To reach who? Building bridges to where? This is a country where marginalization has been a reality, where people feel there's a divide between big communities and small communities in ethnic numbers. Now we are seeing that big communities now mobilize with this sense of entitlement. You saw Munya saying, "Atuendi opposition." I don't know what that means. Who is supposed to go to the opposition? Who is supposed to remain in government? This kind of situation really pains our country in a sad way. Look, that is Governor Kiraitu Murungi. Kiraitu Murungi in 1992, and prior to that, these are people who really inspired the second liberation. We didn't see him as a Meru, or even lately now he talks of dogs and cats. And you know, when politicians do that, you know, they cut really close. I mean, you don't do that. Yeah. Don't compare yourself with animals. And we see that generation of the second liberation. What is the second liberation about? It wasn't ethnic emancipation. No. It wasn't regional. It wasn't Mount Kenya East, by the way. Here is Kiraitu Murungi, 20 years later, is it plus, talking of Mount Kenya East. Yeah. What happened to Kenya? Where did he put Kenya? What happened to the second liberation? It wasn't the second liberation of a region. It was countrywide. So I think Kenyans should be very sad with how we're mobilizing ahead of the election. Let me make this final point. The Deputy President earlier on spoke about, in that bite, kuungana kushindana mtu. But look, that's exactly how we've done these things all this time. No ideology, no values, nothing. It's who defeats who. And in fact, the last two elections, if we go through the files, they'll always, you know, the NASA side will want their supporters against those guys, and vice versa, Jubilee. So you find that supporters are turning ethnic supporters are coming to the polling station not to vote for, but to vote against.
Yeah.
And I mean, this formula of electing governments, this formula of putting together governments, we will end up in the usual space. And like I said earlier, the day Kenyans realize that there is an ethnic formula to running a complex state like Kenya, the better, because we'll start thinking ideologies. We should have a party in Mount Kenya East that actually has followers in West Pokot.
Yeah.
We should have a party in Nyanza that has followers in Muranga, because then ideology unites us. And here is my last point. Building Bridges initiative was an opportunity. I think when the president speaks of working with the opposition, having a better term, it should have come with certain deliverables. You see, if he was a different political player, there should have been something political other than BBI that would have been harvested out of the handshake. And here is why I think sometimes the president is very incoherent in his messaging also. Because here is a president, luckier than all other before, that has basically gotten all the opposition working with him. What we have right now is literally a single party state, because there is no opposition. But how is this being used as a stepping stone or as a foundation stone to our future? Why aren't they using this opportunity to say, now that we all agree, Kalonzo, Raila, Uhuru, let's join one party, and this party will be social democratic or will be Republican, whatever it is. Give Kenyans something that they can work with for the future. But what are we having? We're going to have short-term vehicles that will be packed the same way PNU was packed, NAC was packed, and Jubilee is also approaching the parking yard.
Joe, I'm itching to...
I think two things. You know, the BBI, you say, presented a great opportunity, yet we have the co-chair of the BBI being quoted as saying that it would be undemocratic, unconstitutional and unfair for a region with over 35% of the country's vote basket to field a presidential candidate. And then, you know, saying anyone has the right to vote. They are still speaking in terms of, you know, the tribal, the numbers, and, you know, how much they can mobilize, despite the fact that they are running a process, you know, that they say was meant to get rid of this. The other thing is, where does this leave the youthful population? Over 70% of Kenya's population is youthful, under 35, and we're seeing all of this jostling on the basis of ethnicity, this east, this west, all of these regional kingpins, who, by the way, for two of them, by the way, what we're seeing with the Mount Kenya East and West will be the same thing that we will see possibly if, you know, Raila doesn't choose to run again, because both of these leaders are, you know, sort of getting towards the end of their political careers. And we started to see a little inkling of that, you know, with Siaya, with James Orengo, and when there was, you know, rumor that whatever was happening was about succession of that. But it's all about wielding this power, this block, this group of people. And so where are the young people in all of this? I would be keen to see whether, you know, they fall in line with the ethnicity or whether there will be a breakaway.
Joe, I was itching to say this. You see, the ideal, there's the what we would want to see in our political space. But unfortunately, there is the reality. There is what it is. Yeah, there is the practical reality of what we see. And the practical reality of what we see is that the one major tool of mobilization in terms of numbers is regional. And that's why you will hear the Mount Kenya leaders say we cannot be in opposition. The Western guys will say we want to be in government. The Eastern, you heard Charity Ngilu today in that interview this morning say that if we go the same route that we've gone, we will be in opposition for another term. Like we
the regional, you mean ethnic? Absolutely.
And you see, even now as we speak, is there talk of crafting a coalition or coalitions? Absolutely, there is. Is there a possibility of talk to turn the handshake team as it is into a coalition or political vehicle for next year? Most definitely. So it's a question of these coalitions built on what? Built on interests. Interests triggered by what? Triggered by specific numbers from certain regions and ethnic groupings. So ultimately, you will end up with a coalition A versus coalition B for the numbers, and then moving forward. Because ultimately, it's about interest. Look around. I mean, the same teams that have been there, the same team of political leaders that has been there, is the same team that we're talking about many years later. Yeah. So that is the situation that we find ourselves in. So there is the ideal, as LK talks about it, but there's also the reality, the practical reality of where we are.
But interests of who? Interests of who is the issue? Because if you look at the grievances, whether economic or political right now, they're even higher in regions that actually elected this government than those that voted against. So what happened? It is again because of that issue that the political elite uses those tools of region to mobilize for their own interests. It has nothing to do with the regions they come from.
Absolutely.
Which are the two regions that were really complaining about development and politics? It was Rift Valley and Central Kenya, the regions that basically formed Jubilee, which is why it's really important to look at how we are mobilizing, because this primitive model of ethnic numbers is actually not working.
Yeah, and I think, ladies and gentlemen, we cannot finish without talking about the referee that will have to sort through all these things and eventually come up with some leaders of some kind elected in some way. The IEBC, and we've seen quite some movement, Yvonne, with the IEBC over the last couple of days. They launched that strategic plan that included a few things they intend to do in a way of rectifying some of the problems they had the last time around, and essentially dusting their coats and saying, hey, we are back, the election is 13 months away. There could yet be a referendum, who knows, depending on what happens in the courts. But seeing IEBC basically coming back to life and saying, talking about BVR kits, and they'd have to procure, and the recruitment now basically apace.
There is much for the entree for this commission. Not to mention, first of all, the fact that they have got to, which is a process that is already ongoing, replace or reconstitute the commission, as it were. They're looking for 4 new commissioners. Please note that the position of CEO of the IEBC, who basically runs the secretariat, which is the day-to-day running and operations of that, is something that is currently tied up in litigation since Ezra Chiloba exited the scene there. And then you have quite a bit of legislation that needs to be put in place. Also, it is important to remember the fact that we have a year to the election. Last time, they left a lot of things like procurement to exactly this point in time, which was a year to. And remember, they have had, during the procurement of the software, the kits and everything, all of those were subject to such litigation. They had up to 50 cases challenging the processes of procurement, spending hundreds of millions of shillings paying for the cost of litigation at that time, having new commissioners coming in, and then there is that mix of trying to blend them in together. There is a continuous voter registration exercise. There is boundaries to take a look at. There is staff to hire ahead of that, and we've got just 13 months to it. I do hope we have not left quite a bit to the last minute, as we did the last time, that then meant even the processes themselves were really hard to do, because you're doing a lot of things, very quickly in a rush. All of those licenses for those BVR kits, have lapsed. And so working with the new commissioners that come in and making sure that this is a process that goes through, considering everything that was said during the Supreme Court verdict, it's going to be a tall order for them, including the fact that diasporas have to vote for the presidency, prisoners have to vote. There's quite a bit that is happening for them there. And
IEBC really needs to shed off that issue of credibility, whether they're credible after what happened in 2017. And I think they needed more time to be able to do that. We're cutting too close, in my opinion. We keep referring to what the Kriegler report said, that the IEBC needs to be in place 2 years to the election. Ivona said just 13 months to. And Wafula Chebukati was saying that they're starting to receive the funding now. not all that they need, but pesa zimeanza kuingia. And they need to be able to have the money to be able to have a good election, prepare for it, because they need to make up for the mistakes that happened in 2017, including this issue I was talking about of the servers and the fact that they'll have more than one server. So there's a lot to be done. And she spoke about the gelling of this commission, because once they start, already wako divided. Let's just accept, because these three have worked together for a while. There are 4 more who are coming, who are just expected to come and sit in and go with the flow, because most of the planning has already been done. So for them is to come, sit, and just continue with what is going on. So for me, it's whether this IBC will have enough time to have a good election, to have a credible election, because they have to make up for the mistakes of 2017.
I think the discussion about IBC and electoral reforms, in my opinion, is 3 years late. Why do I say so? Because at the heart of the problem in 2017 was the whole question of contested elections. And I thought that is where the discussion ought to have begun in terms of electoral reforms. Fix the process such that the next election in 2022, those who win will say this was a clear win. Those who lose will say we've lost it, but in a clear process. But what I found interesting during that launch at the Bomas of Kenya was the confirmation, reaffirmation of the supremacy of the polling station. That is where everything happens. Leave alone the question of transmission and everything else. The supremacy of the polling station. If you get it right at the polling station in terms of identifying voters, in terms of facilitating the voters to vote, in terms of counting the votes, in terms of announcing and declaring results at that polling station and making them public for everybody, and ensuring that that which is transmitted from the polling station is exactly the same as has left the polling station. That is where the whole game ends. I was happy to hear IEBC say they will work with the media. I hope working with the media is ensuring that the results that we get will primarily be from the polling station, such that even at the back end, even right here, you're able to tabulate from this ward, from this constituency, from this county, even at the national level. By the time Wafula Chebukati, if he will still be the chairman of IEBC, will be declaring the presidential results at Bomas of Kenya, or let's say KICC, or wherever the National Tallying Center will be, you will have those results vis-a-vis the results that we will have. And it will be a clear win for whoever will have won. The supremacy of the polling station. Somebody likened it to, if you want to steal, steal in the shamba. Don't steal in the granary. And so let the polling station be the supreme place where those who win, win. Those who lose, lose, not elsewhere.
I think that person should have said, don't steal anything. Whether anything. But anyway, I think we need to end this. We need to end this show. And Jamila, you always say, let's
Yvonne
take it
anaanza,
home.
we are taking it home. Yvonne, tumekupatia watu wa Western waanze, please.
Yeah, take it home from the take.